I'm Addie Kobayashi. I'm a Japanese Canadian. I was interned during the Second World War. I'm the author of Exiles in Our Own Country, Japanese Canadians in Niagara, which was written in 1997.
I'm Lynn Deutscher Kobayashi, and I'm Addie's daughter, and I'm a third generation Japanese Canadian.
We made a Niagara directory, telephone directory, and from there it seemed, what do we do with that? And decided to write this book with the use of interviews. We undertook this project because we wanted to make sure that the history of the settlement of Japanese Canadians in Niagara was not lost or forgotten. We also lost our land, our property, our possessions, so we faced extreme racism in British Columbia. That is difficult. Our history is based on racism, what happened to people, not just the Indigenous people, not just us. Japanese Canadians actually came as early as 1942. They were the younger people who were sent east, and many came through Niagara and worked for weeks, months, maybe a few years. But then it wasn't until after the war ended, when there were many families left in the internment camps, large families especially. Orchards in Niagara needed field hands, and so they had really no choice but to be exiled to Niagara, mainly because of the large families. It became known that the history of Japanese Canadians was unknown in the peninsula. People thought that the Japanese Canadians here were immigrants from Japan, and they knew nothing about how they actually got here, as you know, they were expelled from BC. So they were really exiles, and they did come to a hostile reception, and most of the people did not think of the racism that they faced when they first came, because things had worked out and they were gradually accepted. We faced extreme racism in British Columbia by the governments. What it brings home is that it seemed like Canada was built on racism. Well, things have changed, and some will never happen again, like our situation. They recognize that racism has always been here in Canada, and it is still here. I think it's going to become quite a big problem in future unless we do find some answers.
There was always that awareness that racism was wrong, whether it be against Asians, Japanese Canadians, Black Canadians, or Black Americans. And I think what I got from that was that I never felt like I wanted to be white. A lot of people, Japanese Canadians my age, have told me they wish they were white, and I just never felt that. And I think that was because my parents and grandparents, they just felt like this was wrong and it needs to be changed. I think that my mother especially did a really good job of slowly introducing the idea, because when I did learn about it, it wasn't really a shock. She told us details, like, you know, we lived in these ghost towns, as they referred to the internment camps back then, and talked about the tar paper shacks and how they could see ice forming inside the shacks. But at the same time, they didn't overwhelm us with information. Slowly we became aware that these ghost towns were internment camps. So it was all very gradual, but when they became involved in the redress movement, we began to understand the bigger picture.
Hattie Tunaway's story is actually not unique. It's similar to many women. She had to manage 3 children, looking after her in-laws, sent to a sugar beets farm in Alberta. She made a very big sacrifice when she had to leave 2 of her 3 children in Alberta with the grandparents. She came to Niagara, and ended up being a volunteer in St. Catharines, won many awards. What really struck me was her strength, and then I recognized that that's a strength that many women had. The strength of the women to just be uprooted and displaced, not know where they're going, that comes home to me as something that maybe hasn't been fully recognized. And life was very, very difficult during this disruption. And in Niagara residents, non-Japanese, they are really startled to find out that they're Japanese Canadians were not immigrants, did not come from Japan, and that most were Canadian citizens. They were also startled to find out how they were treated, and there was rampant racism in the local councils, business, whatever. So that was a big surprise to them. This kind of thing can happen in Canada, did happen in Canada. Luckily, with the redress agreement, hopefully it will never happen again, but it almost did. Yes, that people recognize that Canada is not perfect. And
just when I think that, Asian Canadians were feeling, part of Canada, that the pandemic kind of drew out this anti-Asian racism in similar ways to what Japanese Canadians experience, blaming Chinese Canadians for the virus, blaming Chinese Canadians for what was happening in China. So I think it's important that people realize that those kinds of dynamics existed in Canada and are kind of rearing its ugly head again, and understanding that hopefully will prevent it from happening, to the degree it happened to Japanese Canadians.